Hello, and welcome to Words and Music by and about James Joyce. I'm Kathleen Fee, Artistic Director of Festival Bloomsday Montreal. And this one-of-a-kind concert is the keystone of our 11th annual Bloomsday Festival, celebrating Irish culture in Montreal. We are in the sanctuary of the Unitarian Church of Montreal, a glorious, soaring architectural space with fabulous acoustics. And we're about to hear two very special pieces. But first, we'd like to acknowledge that we are on the unceded indigenous territory of Diodiage, and that the Ganigahaga Mohawk Nation is the custodian of these lands and waters. We begin with the music. Six Commentaries pour Ulysses de James Joyce was composed in 1943 by Thomas de Hartmann. He was Ukrainian, and like so many artists in the early 20th century, he was forced repeatedly to flee revolutions, wars, and upheavals. Stuck in occupied Paris during the Second World War, he composed this suite and others to perform with his wife, Olga, a lyric soprano. Geraldina Mendez searched long and hard to find the words of Ulysses set to music. She fell in love with this work of de Hartmann and then set out to find the publisher to get permission to perform and record it. Another lengthy search revealed that the music is out of print and unavailable, but that, astonishingly, the rights and the composer's original manuscript belong to Thomas A.G. Daley, a retired math teacher who lives right here in Montreal, about a block from here, in fact. Tom Daley is the godson of Olga de Hartmann. He is committed to bringing the work of a major 20th century composer out of obscurity with the help of the Thomas de Hartmann Project, and is delighted to support the Canadian premiere of this song cycle. Another cycle that de Hartmann and Joyce were only too familiar with is that of war. De Hartmann's homeland of Ukraine is being shattered. Lives are being torn apart. Exile is once again a grim reality for so many. Tonight's performers are exiles too, from Venezuela, where they trained and performed to great acclaim. We are so glad to be able to provide a safe haven and a beautiful performance space for them to concertize in. Please join me in welcoming Geraldina Mendez and Maria Teresa Vera.
Bronze bei Gott Hagaufheit uns Stilirin Impertinent, dun 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 dun. Chips picking chips up rocky thumbnail, chips up rocky thumbnail, up rocky thumbnail, chips picking chips. Horrid and God flushed more. Say 5 foot blue, 5 foot blue, blue is on the gold pinnacled hair, a jumping rose of satiny breasts, of satin rose of Castile. Ding, ding, ay dolores, ay dolores, ay dolores. Beep, beep, who's in the beep of gold? Tink, 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 try to bronze pity. And to call pure, long and throbbing. You mean the wheel? That has been explained, I believe, by jurists. She was entitled to her widow's dower. At common law, his legal knowledge was great. Our judges tell us. Him say Feliz Mocant. Therefore he left out a name from the first draft, but he did not leave out the present for his granddaughter, for his daughters, for his sister, for his old cronies in Stratford and in London. And therefore when he was searched, as I believe, to name her, he left her his second best punkt. Left her his second best. Left her his bästa bed. Säkra bäst. Lefta bed. Lefta bed. From a corner, the morning hours run out, gold-haired, slim-sandaled, in girlish blue, wasp-waisted, with innocent hands. Nimbly they dance, twirling their skipping ropes. The hours of noon follow in amber gold. Laughing linked, high hair comes flashing. They catch the sun in mocking mirrors, lifting their arms. The morning and noon hours, what's in the place is turning, advancing to each other, shaping the curves, bowing vis-a-vis. Cavaliers behind them, archers suspend their arms, with hands descending to touching, rising from their shoulders, touching. Rising from the shoulders, rising from the shoulders, you may touch mine. May I touch your, may I touch your, but lightly, oh, so lightly, oh, so lightly. The summer gone to fold the world in its mysterious embrace, far away in the west, the sun was setting, and the last glow of what fleeting day lingered lovingly on sea and strand. On the proud promontory of dear oath, guarding assembled the waters over the bay, on the weed-grown rocks alone, sandy Mount shore, and last but not least, on the quiet church, whence there streamed forth the times upon the stillness, and the voice of prayer to her who is in her pure radiance, beacon ever to the storm-tossed heart of man. Mary, star of the sideways lead breathe, just for a few. Cuckoo, The clock on the mantelpiece of the priest's household were canon on. Oh, and Father Conroy on the river into Brooks's tea were taking tea and soda bread and butter and fried mutton chops with catsup, and we're talking about because it was a little canary bird that came out of this little house to turn the tender dirty, and I will notice the time. She was there because she was a squeaker silly thing about a thing like that was skirting a tower, and she noticed at once that foreign gentleman that was sitting on the rocks. He was cuckoo. And the big wheels of the cars of the balls, and the old castle thousands of years old, yes, and those handsome Moors all in white and turbans like kings, asking you to sit down in the little bit of a shop, and Ronda with the old windows of the posadas, two glancing eyes, a lattice hit for her lover to kiss the iron, and the wine shops have open at night, and the castanets. The boat at Algeciras. The watchman going about, sitting with his lamp, and to that afar, the torrent. The crimson, sometimes like fire on the glorious sunset. And the fig trees in the Alameda gardens, yes, unto the Quindita street, and pink and blue and yellow houses, and the rose gardens, and the jessamine, and geraniums, and cactuses, and flower of the mountain. Yes, when I put the rose in my hair, like the Andalusian girls used, or shall I wear a red? Yes, and how he kissed me under the moon's wall, and I thought, well, he must know that. And then I asked him with my eyes to ask again, yes. And then he asked me, would I kiss to say yes? And first I put my arms around him, yes, and drew him down to me, so he could feel my and his heart was going like mad, and yes, I said yes, I will, yes. Trieste, Zurich, Paris, 1914, 1921.
And now we move on to Debbie Wiess's play of Thyme and Rosemary, an imaginary encounter between James Joyce and Marcel Proust. John Hernan plays Joyce and Arthur Holden Proust in this reading directed by Elsa Bolam. The action takes place in Joyce's residence in Zurich. Or does it?
I exaggerate not. Since our arrival in 1904, my wife Nora and I have been all over Europe, arriving in Zurich via Holyhead, London, and Paris, on to Trieste with a stop in Ljubljana, to Pola, back to Trieste, to Rome, back to Trieste, back to Zurich, back to Trieste, to Paris, to London, to back to Paris, to Saint-Gérard-le-Puy and Vichy, back to Zurich again. Our travels could well be considered a greater odyssey than that of Ulysses after the fall of Troy. Somewhat less heroic, perhaps, but longer and more circuitous.
Heureux qui comme Ulysse a fait un beau voyage. I envy your travels. My life has been spent almost entirely in Paris. Since summer 1914, I haven't budged except when obliged to change apartments.
Hardly
Twice.
travel and nothing to envy. Our moving about was generally not for pleasure, but out of necessity. In each city, we found ourselves obliged to change apartments quite often. We moved 18 times in about as many years in Paris alone. Stateless but considered citizens of an enemy nation, we found ourselves refugees of both great wars. Only by the skin of our teeth did we make our way out to sanctuary in Zurich at the onset of each. Those experiences were absolutely harrowing, let me tell you.
You were at least fortunate to escape the fighting.
Oh yes, I escaped, one way or the other.
I was stuck in Paris during the First War and had to endure the endless German bombardments and air raids. That was harrowing.
You could have left.
I tried, once, but that turned out to be almost as bad as staying. I had sought some respite from the war in Cabourg on the Normandy coast. Terrible complications arose and we had to return. On the train back, I had the most horrible allergy attack. That episode nearly did me in, and I never again left the capital. You had it easy in Zurich. You could write in relative calm. Somehow, I am not sure how, I found the strength to continue working on my novel in spite of everything. By the end of the war, the project had expanded from 3 volumes to 7.
Yes, it was a veritable life of Riley, arriving in a foreign land without funds or friends, my family not knowing the language. We had many a change of address there, too, as we tried to settle in.
A change of address is a great annoyance, but given my fragile health, they too were harrowing experiences.
Our moves were greatly complicated by all the problems I had with my eyes. All that moving about just to end up in Zurich where we began, coming full circle. Just like my Finnegan Wake, which starts where it left off, in chaos.
My little novel is also a fantastic circle. It begins and ends with time, the universal beginning and ending.
Chaos may be the greater universal.
Time or chaos, who knows which came first? It is much like the riddle about the chicken and the egg, no?
We Joyces are much like the Rolling Stone. We never have been ones to gather any moss.
Like the wandering Jew.
So says a man whose mother was Jewish.
It's a fact I've never been ashamed of.
I wasn't implying you should have been. I found there to be much in common between the Jews and the Irish. I'm the queerest young fellow that ever you heard. My mother's a Jew, my father's a bird. With Joseph the joiner I cannot agree, so here's to disciples in Calvary. If anyone thinks that I amn't divine, he'll get no free drinks when I'm making the wine, but have to drink water and wish it were plain, then I make when the wine becomes water again. Goodbye now, goodbye, write down all I said, and tell Tom, Dick, and Harry I rose from the dead. What's bred in the bone cannot fail me to fly, and Olivet's breezy, goodbye now, goodbye. Ulysses and the Wandering Jew are simply different versions of the same character, you know.
Except that the errant Jew's wandering never ends. Was it all your wanderings that inspired your Ulysses, or simply your admiration of Homer, Monsieur Joyce?
Mr. Joyce was my father. You can just call me
Oh,
James.
you're right. No need to be so formal, especially not here, n'est-ce pas, Jim? And you must call me Marcel. So, what was the inspiration for Ulysses?
To me, the Greeks of antiquity are the most cultured nation. I've always believed their classics to be at the heart of great storytelling. The subject of the Odyssey is the most human in world literature, and the character of Ulysses the most complete and complex. Since I was a boy, he has been my hero.
I also appreciate Homer and the Greek classics, like his Ulysses, who was begged by those shades to be brought back to life. I had hundreds of characters and thousands of ideas beg me to give them form. But instead of dispersing them with my sword, I granted them life with the stroke of my pen.
The author's pen can be just as mighty as the warrior's sword.
Touché! Important as are the works of those antiquities, in my view, supreme above all are those of the great French writers, Saint-Simon, Balzac, Flaubert, Zola, and, of course, Racine, whose Phèdre is a little jewel.
But don't you see that your French classics draw from the ancient ones?
Invariably, the works that come before must make their impact on and inspire that which follows, though I would not want to imply that a good book is a sort of composite of all past good books. Rather, it is something special, something unforeseeable of its own that goes beyond what hath been done before.
My Ulysses is a modern epic following exactly the Odyssey, chapter for chapter, but about the Irish and Israelite races in a little story of a single day in a life. The central character, Leopold Bloom, is not so much the wandering Jew, but a Jew who, like Ulysses, wanders. They both return home to their Penelope, though Bloom is cuckolded by his, which is probably more realistic.
Or pessimistic. My character, Charles Swan, is Jewish, and he too has an unfaithful wife. In fact, very few relationships in my novel end well. Seems we're both pessimists.
Or realists. The one need look no further than religion and politics, two Irish obsessions, to see why we of Ireland might be so pessimistic. Both can oppress and dampen the advancement of a nation's civilization. I care little for either. Still, in my work, there is a good deal of talk about religion, and I do not shy away from politics.
I do not care much for them either, although I did take a stand to support Le Pauvre Dreyfus. Politics and religion are both nevertheless treated in my novel along with everything else. Didn't you study with the Jesuits?
I did indeed. Many people think I was a spoiled priest, but I profess no religion at all in spite of my mother's efforts. I may have lost my faith, but not my self-respect. Protestantism and Catholicism are both false, but of the two, I must say I prefer the latter. The one is cold and colorless. The other, associated with art, is a beautiful lie.
Catholicism is the more pleasing to the eye. I was raised in that faith, but I only admired the art and architecture of its churches and cathedrals.
As I said, just a beautiful lie. But I suppose that is at least something.
What about the Celtic beliefs? There is much to be said for the one in which the souls of those whom we have lost are held captive in some inferior being or inanimate object. As soon as we have recognized them, the spell is broken, and they are able to rejoin us in life. That gave me hope that I might again see ma très chère mère.
A charming notion, though. I dare not imagine what receptacle my soul will be held. It's because of this fixation on religion and politics we Irish have not produced a large body of art. What talent we have seems to have gone into our literature. I've tried to lift Irish prose to the level of international masterpieces and to represent fully the Irish genius. The important thing is not what we write, but how we write. And in my opinion, the modern writer must be an adventurer above all, willing to take every risk and be prepared to founder in the effort if need be. In other words, we must write dangerously. In Ulysses, I tried to do this, expressing the multiple variations which make up the social fabric of a city, its degradations and exaltations.
If one writes about life and society, one must, of course, include everything, the base as well as the sublime. All the same, the reader need not be assaulted by crude language and descriptions of bodily functions, deviant sexual behavior, and the perverse. There should be a certain délicatesse et raffinement, even in my Sodome et Gomorrah.
But what you're suggesting would be like paving over a cesspool. The gauge of a civilization is its odor, which invariably percolates into its literature. Ulysses smells of the Dublin of my day, of the Analiphi. Not always a very sweet smell, perhaps, but distinctive all the same.
The effluvium, oui, je vois. That is what interests you.
Reading should be a visceral activity, experienced by all the senses.
I do not disagree. I only suggest that this perhaps be viewed through a more aesthetic lens.
So that your French sensibilities not be ruffled.
It appears your extended stay on the continent has done nothing to temper the crudeness of your Irish sensibilities, nor influence your writing much. You write only of Dublin.
I've spent half my life in Europe, but it has never interested me as a subject. Still, it has been a source of inspiration. An author writes what he knows, and all I really know is Dublin. Being outside of it helped me see it more clearly. My feeling is if I can get to the heart of Dublin, I can get to the heart of all the cities of the world. In the particular is contained the universal.
The converse is also true. I write of what I know, but I did not need to leave Paris to write about it. In the course of one man's life, my novel shows the vicissitudes and caprices of society and how everything is interconnected.
Yes, everything is intertwinkled. All of Bloom's life culminates and can be summed up in the events of one day, June 16th, 1904. Although Ulysses is 735 pages long, it could have been just as possible to devote a whole library of books to describing one single minute of his life.
Some believe I created a small library with 3,000 pages contained in my novel's volumes.
People read more into Ulysses than I ever intended. But who is to say that they were wrong? Did Shakespeare know what he was creating when he wrote Hamlet? Or Leonardo when he painted The Last Supper?
The nature of the critic and intellectual, they are not necessarily the same, is to probe deeper for significance. They cannot help themselves.
All sorts of revelations may be hallucinated if one looks fixedly enough. My friend Valerie Larbeau likened Ulysses to the sky, whose beauty is increased when we study it for a long time by the discovery of innumerable new stars. Excessive, perhaps, but I did not mind the comparison.
I wrote my novel simply for the pleasure I hoped would be found in its reading.
As did I. Ulysses is fundamentally a humorous work, though many don't recognize it as such.
My novel is suffused with humor, and it baffles me when people do not see it.
There's something very inhuman about an author who has no sense of humor, don't you think? It's a thing I find some of your French writers, like Stendhal, liked. Perhaps it's a symptom of his being a romantic and a product of the Napoleonic age. Nevertheless, his Chartreuse de Parme is a good book. I appreciated his references to Circe.
I'm glad you found some merit in Stendhal. We French can be very serious, but do not forget, we were the inventors of wit and repartee. Our humor is often cloaked in irony. The writer is a great observer of life, so how can he not have humor in his work? We observe and are inspired. Still, we innovate and express new ideas. Otherwise, what would be the point?
That is the question. And as an answer, I might go as far as to say that, like Einstein's general theory of relativity, which some have seen reflected in my work, there is likely some invisible force that incites this absolute necessity to express himself.
I was just speaking to Einstein the other day about his theories on space and time. It has been thought that I derived from him, or he from me, but as I do not know algebra, I don't understand a single word of his theories. Still, I am intrigued by this force he describes, and I have been telling him my own ideas. It seems we have a similar way of distorting time.
Nora rather believes this drive for expression to be some sort of madness.
Writing is indeed une manie.
Therein may lie the secret to genius. All great men must have a bit of madness in them. It's the source of their greatness. The reasonable man achieves nothing.
Put like that, I shall never again think of being reasonable. This feeling is like a mountain that tantalizes and obsesses us, that must be climbed at all costs.
I've often felt that in creating my work, I'm boring into a mountain from all sides without knowing what I'm going to find as I explore the limits of the English language.
I've felt my writing to be like a rich mineral field with many precious seams, and my biggest fear was that I, the only miner capable of exploiting them, would not have the time to do so, to create my great work. It was more a relief than anything else when I finally wrote fin on the final page of my novel. I did not want to fill my tomb before I had completed my monument.
I felt a tremendous sense of relief and accomplishment after completing each of my books, particularly Ulysses and Finnegan's Wake.
They, as well as my À la recherche du temps perdu, are certainly grand summits of literature to be climbed by the intrepid reader.
The real Everest is being able to get one's work published.
Oh, writing seems easy compared to the overwhelming tasks of trying to get into print and dealing with publishers. Each and every publisher I had initially approached refused me. I had to practically beg for the privilege of paying to have my first volume printed. But after Mon Prix Goncourt and the success of my novel, the publishers came running to me to beg to have the honor of printing the other volumes. Such is the irony of publishing.
I had my own sagas. With each of my novels, it was like the Battle of Troy and the Voyage of the Odyssey. The publishers in Ireland were the worst, ever waffling and changing their minds and not honoring their agreements. They kept demanding that I change my text, their squeamish lawyers afraid of libel suits. Before I could get a set of proofs for Dubliners back from the printer, they were burned at the stake. It may have been their intention to weary me out and, if possible, strangle me once and for all, but they did not succeed. If it were not for the help of friends like Ezra Pound, Harriet Shaw Weaver, and Sylvia Beach, who believed in me and my work, I would not have been published nor had the financial freedom to write.
You were fortunate to have your patrons and supporters. I had neither, just faith in my novel.
One must have faith. That is the minimum. But I was not independently wealthy like you. I had a family to support. Poor as a church mouse, I didn't have a sou to pay for publication. Have you ever written a play, Marcel? Even trickier than being published is being produced. And to my mind, an unperformed play is just really some dead deportee, not much good for anything. I had a devil of a time with my play Exiles.
I have not delved into playwriting, having my hands too full with my little novel. There is, however, much of the theatre and other arts in it. And of course, in our work, we put all the drama that is life, n'est-ce pas?
The dramas, big and small, of the day-to-day. The veritable spices and herbs of life. Like thyme and rosemary, they are sprinkled in one's work as in a nice Irish stew.
The art is in the sprinkling, eh, Jim?
There's also much drama to be found in the cinema. That is where there is really something to sink your teeth into. I tried to bring cinematograph theatres to Dublin, but was again thwarted by Irish piety and parochialisms.
I have never been a great fan of the seventh art, having always preferred live performances. Ah, you have a painting of cork. How amusing. It has a cork frame.
Nice to see you have a sense of humour. My father's family come from there.
It makes me think of Vermeer's View of Delft. Ever since I saw it at the Moritz House in The Hague when I was young, I knew I had seen the most beautiful painting in the world. There was a certain radiance in the work that touched me. I was dizzy when I saw it again in 1921 at an exhibition of Dutch art at the Jeu de Paume.
Another fine portrait of a city.
I pay homage to Vermeer and his painting with references throughout my novel. Sometimes, just as my character, the writer Bergotte, I wonder if my writing was as précieux as the little patch of yellow wall painted with so much skill and refinement.
You needn't have worried. The proof is in the passage you so poignantly wrote about the night following Bergotte's burial. How in the lighted shop windows of Paris, his books, arranged 3 by 3, kept vigil like angels with outspread wings. This symbolic resurrection is the hope of every author. Such writing ensures that a work will endure.
So you did read my novel?
Yes, of course.
But you said before, that night at the Majestic...
That's right, I said I didn't. However, at the time, I'd actually read the first 2 volumes in French. And later on, I read the rest.
But then, why...
Admitting to a writer one has read his books invariably necessitates the obligatory compliment.
Very true. I am the most amazed of all at the success of my little novel. To me, it seemed no more than some indigestible nougat, but for whatever reason it seems to please. It is absolutely beyond my comprehension that I was awarded the Goncourt and then the Légion d'honneur. Despite the great hardships, I devoted myself entirely to the task for the sake of my readers, not for any glory I might reap, or my posterity.
We artists are nothing if not altruistic.
And modest. A writer puts much of himself, his experiences, the people and places he has known, as seen through the filter of his memories, into his work. For that reason, the occupation of novelist is an extremely exhausting one, and he must wring himself out in the process of creating.
Isn't that the truth? I feel I've put my entire self and then some into my work. And I am in there literally in the form of Stephen Dedalus. I don't know anyone who has subjugated his life to his work more completely than, except we two. It seemed a perpetual slavery of body and spirit, tortured by a word, rebelliously constructing a framework, constantly questioning my characters, extracting a vision from some music or reference. I might spend an entire day just to form a single sentence.
I would spend days on end composing, rephrasing, reconfiguring, and reforming the text. The margins of my pages would be completely filled, and I had to use quantities of paperole, little pieces of paper that I would attach to my sheets to note further changes.
I could have used some of your paperole. In the same way a farmer will go back and forth to plough the earth crust of his field, I would look at words and phrases both backwards and forwards to try and break new ground in language.
That is the goal, isn't it? To try to be groundbreakers, each in his own way, in the agonizing process of seeking the truth, our own truth.
Beauty is truth, truth, beauty. That is all you know on earth and all you need to know.
A moving poem of great beauty. Keats pays homage to the Greek urn as a silent sentinel of the past. It is singular, his treatment of time and memory.
Thyme and Rosemary.
As you prefer. The scene on the vase is frozen in time like a photograph.
Truth and beauty are akin, although the former is beheld by the intellect and the latter by imagination. What interests me most is getting down to the residuum of the truth about life, instead of puffing it up with romanticism.
Ever the realist.
Or maybe the pessimist.
For me, art is a perpetual sacrifice of sentiment to truth, and the key to getting at the truth buried within each person in the process of discovering what is significant has always been la mémoire involontaire. As I say in my first volume, just like with the Japanese game in which little pieces of paper dipped in a bowl of water become people, flowers, etc., All those I knew, my family's home, the gardens and their flowers, the church, all of Cambrai and its environs, everything is evoked and takes its form from a single cup of tea.
My books are made up of my memories and experiences as well, though I use interior monologues to reveal them through the consciousnesses of my chief characters, Stephen Dedalus and Leopold and Molly Bloom. It is this journey into the interior that intrigues us writers as a literary quest, as well as a quest to gain an understanding of the human psyche. How marvelous it has been, Marcel, to converse with you like this.
It's a pity we weren't able to do so when we first met, Jim? You remember that dinner party at the Hôtel Majestic in Paris?
May 18th, 1922. The party of the century, they were calling that little shindig of the Schiffs.
Sydney and Violet Schiff, our very cultured British friends, who collected artists and authors as one might collect art and books. We were both collected, as it were, and put up on their shelf to be admired.
More like thrown together, along with Diaghilev, Stravinsky, and Picasso for good measure, to create an evening of scintillating conversation on cue for the amusement of those other dinner guests. Everyone was expecting us to chat ever so pleasantly about our work, though I had sensed that there might have been a furtive attempt to turn a certain French author against yours truly. Like a bunch of trained monkeys in monkey suits to boot, we were put on stage to perform. How could I forget?
I thought you might have, as it seemed to me you had quite a lot to drink. And you were not wearing a monkey suit, as you call it. Far from it.
I may have had a bit to drink that night, and though the chronology of events in one's memory can become quite a tangled skein, I remember very distinctly details, people, and words spoken.
Memory for me has always been an incredible kaleidoscope of images, of people, places, and things, seen and experienced, that whirl and reform in one's mind.
I remember that night quite well, as if it were yesterday.
It's funny how events of long ago can feel as if they were just yesterday, while others, very recent, seem such ancient history, though something may occur to bring them forth to us in a rush of memory. Have you noticed how some people remain essentially the same as when we knew them years before, while others we knew so well we can no longer recognize? Time does not treat us all kindly, accelerating or retarding its tempo. You, Jim, seem as young as when we first met, although now you are older than me.
I feel as old as Methuselah.
Imagine how I must feel, having joined him almost 20 years earlier than you. There are times you feel you remain the same while the world and others change around you. And then times when you remember others as you saw and knew them in the past, not as they are now. That's the great trick of time and memory. Years pass and the young replace the old. Those who follow having their déjeuner sur l'herbe on top of those who have been before and are now below ground.
It's the natural order of things. But if one is fortunate enough to have children, it is a joyful succession. Perhaps the greatest moment in my life was when I learned of the birth of my grandson, Stephen.
For me, my work has been my children. With each volume, there has been a sort of birth.
Exactly. Thinking of the books I have written, they have been as children I have carried for years and years in the womb of the imagination, fed day after day out of my brain and my memory. The period of labor can be quite long and extremely laborious. The wake took me 17 years.
My novel was a Herculean labor. I spent my whole life preparing for and then writing it. That first dialogue we had was quite labored, as I recall. I started things off since it didn't seem you were going to.
Yes, you asked me if I liked truffles.
Oh, I thought I asked about your stay in Paris. I do like truffles, very much in fact, but I absolutely adore asparagus. That is my favorite food. I was just trying to engage you in some polite conversation. At least I didn't ask about the weather.
Then you queried me to see if I knew any of a litany of aristocrats in your circle. It all seemed so much pretentious braggadocio. I thought you a great snob. My friends are not princesses, duchesses, countesses, and the like, but rather their maids, who I find, and have always found, the more companionable.
You should know that those of all classes are among my acquaintance. I'm sorry you were put off. It was my poor attempt to keep things going. The conversation did seem to find its footing later on.
That's right. When we were comparing notes about our physical ailments into the wee hours. That too seemed almost a competition as we shared all the gory details of our symptoms and the difficulties we dealt with. I'm not sure who came out ahead.
I think it was a draw.
At least you didn't have the constant fear of going blind.
Ah, oui. I only had a problem breathing, nothing so very important.
I lost count of the surgeries and procedures I had on my eyes. Each one was like a medieval torture.
Seeking any measure of relief, I was subjected to an endless array of the most foul and terrible potions, shots, and remedies.
I could barely see at all most of the time.
I was constantly gasping for
The
breath.
pain left me prostrate, feeling my head like to explode.
I would be utterly incapacitated for days, writing
For
under
one who
such
writes,
conditions
this was a
extremely
living nightmare
difficult,
that
if
cannot
not
be
impossible.
imagined. Seems we both had our crosses to bear.
Seems so. I didn't care for you much then.
Well, I didn't care for you very much either.
You were quite drunk, and not even in proper evening attire.
At least I was there for dessert. You were incredibly late, not arriving till 2:30 in the morning.
Was it really that late? The shifts had asked me to stop by after dinner, and that is what I did.
I'll never forget how you waltzed into the shift's party, nice as you please, so stiff and formal, a stick up your arse, wearing that fur-lined coat of yours and those white kid gloves. I thought you looked like the hero of the novel The Sorrows of Satan. Talk about affectation. It was mid-May and hardly cold at all.
Hardly affectation. I had a most delicate constitution, very sensitive to air currents, and I feared getting a chill. I suppose you went to the premiere of Stravinsky's new ballet at the Opéra Garnier that night?
No, I didn't. The Russian ballet was all the rage, but I didn't care much for it. I had been to the Rite of Spring, and that was more than enough for me. I thought its merit exaggerated.
Oh, I thought it rather inspired.
No accounting for taste.
What was that?
Nothing. I imagine that Diaghilev and Stravinsky were annoyed neither of us attended the show that night and were fawning over it.
I had wondered why Monsieur Stravinsky was so short with me when I tried to engage him about music and brought up Beethoven's late quartets. That was probably a misjudgment on my part.
Probably. I would say most definitely. When you arrived, you created quite a stir. I'm not sure what you did to cause the Princess Murat to storm out like that. She gave you such an evil look, like she just might kill something.
I think she wanted to kill me. She was still fuming about what I wrote in Le Côté de Guermantes, which came out over a year prior. For some reason, she thought I based the character of the Duchesse de Guermantes' cousin Zénaïde de Dicourt on her.
Hell hath no fury.
Like a woman who thinks she's been depicted unflatteringly in fiction. I suppose it's natural that everyone in a writer's circle wonders if they are being portrayed in his work. Paris was abuzz, speculating on the identities of my characters.
My ears were ringing with the buzz I stirred up in Dublin after Dubliners and each of my novels came out. It was pretty clear about whom and what I was writing. I'm not one afraid to call a spade or mince words. Do you think I gave a tinker's damn what anyone thought because of it? Still, all those concerns about libel were for naught. But I didn't dare set foot there again nonetheless.
When were you last in Ireland?
Summer 1912. I and our son Giorgio joined Nora and daughter Lucia there. I'd been back twice already, but it was Nora's first time. I hope to resolve once and for all my impasse with Marcel, my so-called publisher for Dubliners. It was nothing but an exercise in pure frustration and futility. We have not returned since. This lovely land that always sent her writers and artists to banishment, and in a spirit of Irish fun, betrayed her own leaders one by one. 'Twas Irish humour, wet and dry, flung quick time into Parnell's eye.
Did you never think of going back, even for a surreptitious visit?
Surely you jest. I'm not a suicidal man, and as sure as I'm sitting here, I'm positive that had I returned, I would have been shot, probably in the heart. My move to the continent was not immigration, but self-imposed exile from my ignorant, famine-stricken and treacherous homeland. It can be dangerous to leave one's country, but it can be still more dangerous to go back to it,
People's memory can be long.
and very unforgiving.
Time can heal and make quarrels recede, but clearly not always. I assured everyone that I created everything from my imagination and my novel was pure fiction. Yet many friends broke off with me when my volumes came out because of the depictions they thought they saw.
Much later, I came to know that I was admired and read in my native land, and I secretly nurtured the hope that I would get an invitation from the Irish government to return home to a bit of fanfare.
Very peculiar, this indifference towards its great writers and what they did for their country.
Not indifference, out-and-out hostility, as the government kowtowed to the Catholic Church, unlike yours.
Civilized as it is, France has always had a strong appreciation for the arts and celebrated its greats. Or perhaps it just enjoys a good party more.
It was to be safe from the rabid and soul-destroying political atmosphere in error land that I stayed in Europe. For in such an atmosphere produced by our father Murphys, it's impossible to create good work. At a very early stage, I came to the conclusion that to stay would be to rot, and I had never any intention of rotting. Or at least, if I had to, I intended to rot in my own way.
Rotting in one's own way is always best. And in the end, we all most certainly do so. Literally.
You may have a stick up your arse, Marcel, but you know, you're all right.
And you, Jim, contrary to my first impression, I find you très charmant. After
that party, you invited the shifts back to your apartment. I had heard about your cork-lined room and was most interested to see where you wrote and hoped to join you, but then got the bum's rush being packed off in your car to be taken by your chauffeur.
I know, and I am sorry about that, Jim.
I was fit to be tied and thought it was the bloody recherche biscuit. Despite my ill treatment, I invited you over. You're lucky I don't bear a grudge.
I never invite those I don't really know to my home. You needn't have been so disappointed, since that room had become a myth. The cork panels from my bedroom in my previous apartment were never installed at Rue Hamelin.
I had my own quiet space to work when I first arrived in Paris in 1920. Larbeau lent me his flat in the Latin Quarter. It had a room especially designed for writing, but I didn't like working in it.
Ah, no?
When I'm working, I like to hear noise going on around me, the noise of life. There was like writing in a tomb. I suppose I would have gotten used to it, but I didn't want to, because then I might have lost my ability to work wherever I happened to be.
I have always been a sensitive creature requiring complete silence to work. My bedroom became my haven, and sick as I often was, I came to write in bed. It was comforting as well as comfortable.
I've always been found that it could be very productive as well as reproductive in bed.
I have had it said to me that if one knows the author, it is then unnecessary to read his book. There are people superior to their books, but then I think that's more a commentary about their books.
The work derives from the author, but they are entirely separate things.
And, contre Saint-Beuve, one need not understand the author to appreciate his work. It is in the reading and rereading of the text alone that the finely crafted layers, like the petals of a beautiful flower coming into bloom, are revealed, and the music and poetry of the prose savored like a fine wine.
A little much, but not badly stated. Finnegan's Wake is a book with a multitude of layers and mysteries to be deciphered, like the megaliths of Karnak and Easter Island. I've put in so many enigmas and puzzles that it will keep the professors busy for centuries arguing over what I meant, and will require an infinite number of readings. That may be my way of ensuring immortality.
It has puzzled, perplexed, and perturbed many, including me, to no end.
Though it may seem to lack meaning, it does impress because it bears witness to the height to which man's art may aspire. So you know the Wake.
I've read all your books, though I cannot say I understood a whit of your Wake. Still, your virtuoso facility to manipulate language and fantastic imagination truly impressed me. You see, I am not afraid to admit reading an author, nor giving a well-deserved compliment.
Thank you. I'm flattered.
I hadn't read your books when we met before. I couldn't, since they had yet to be translated into French. But that is no longer an impediment. And since November 18th, 1922, I've had a lot of time to catch up on my reading.
Let me return the compliment and say that, in spite of the fact that you write about decaying aristocrats, I think you one of the best of the modern French writers, and rank up there with Balzac.
Merci, I think. Although I do very much appreciate the comparison with Balzac.
I admired how your style conveys that almost imperceptible but relentless erosion of time. I just wondered how it might have been had you continued to write in the style of your earlier books on 1890s Parisian society, Les Plaisirs et les Jours. One can get lost in the tangle of your sentences in À la Recherche, as it can suffer from over-elaboration.
Sounds like the pot calling the kettle black. It's nice to know that Les Plaisirs et les Jours is still being read. I'm not surprised you don't mention my first novel, Jean Santeuil.
We both had our false starts. Mine was Stephen Hero.
Nevertheless, they too would eventually be published.
Just another irony of publishing. I would have preferred that it never saw the light of day.
I have a preference for your earlier work too. Dubliners, and particularly a portrait of the artist as a young man, for its reflective examination of the past. Perhaps it is the romantic in me.
Portrait is a book of my youth, but Ulysses is a book of my maturity. Ulysses is more satisfying and better resolved. It took me half a lifetime to reach the necessary equilibrium where I could express things as I should.
Equilibrium is necessary to write. When ma chère maman died, I completely lost mine. But after 2 years in a sanatorium, I recovered it and was able to write my novel. She has since told me she is proud.
I'm not sure about my parents. I always felt that they were looking over my shoulder with disapproval. You may be the romantic to my realist, but we two have been considered both eccentric, as well as extraordinary in our style. Our innovations were not simply experimentation, but were necessary to express modern life as we saw it. With us, a new way of thinking and writing has been started. As life changes, so much the style to express it. No one would think of writing a modern drama in the style of ancient Greeks or a Middle Ages morality play.
En effet.
The best authors of any period have always been the prophets. The Tolstoys, the Dostoevskys, the Ibsens, those who brought something new to literature.
To the prophets and what they have inspired.
But then we must also toast ourselves for what we have brought to literature.
Better to toast our work. May it always be appreciated wherever intelligence exists, and through it, may we live on.
Hear, hear. Though the great misfortune is that the world is largely inhabited by imbeciles, and the literati are not always as discerning than the rabble.
Oh, to the reading rabble, then.
What else shall we toast?
We can toast Sidney and Violet Schiff for having l'audace to bring us together, though unfortunately not la délicatesse to allow us to converse as we should have.
Yes, a toast to the Schiff's chutzpah.
Chin chin.
Sláinte.
By the way, Jim, you do realize what day it is today?
You'd think it likely it slipped my mind. In a tribute to my Nora, that was the day of our first date.
To Bloomsday!
To Bloomsday. And first encounters.
Although I must say that second encounters can be an improvement on the first.
I second that.
And may I congratulate you on the centennial of your Ulysses.
Yes, how about that? I confess I had my doubts, having the book banned, burned, and put on trial after spending years writing it.
Ah, though it was not banned in Ireland like my novel.
Because mine was not allowed in the country to begin with. If Sylvia Beach had not offered to publish it herself, the project would have been deader than a dead deportee. Still, it took 11 grueling months with myriad mishaps and stumbling blocks to prepare the manuscript to be printed in France. The typesetters didn't know a word of English, which was advantageous because they had no idea what they were printing, but also very problematic because they had no idea what they were printing. I was ready to pull my hair out.
But how marvelous to be vindicated, n'est-ce pas? To vindication.
And to Sylvia Beach, the woman truly deserves sainthood for all of her patience and dedication, and efforts to get the book published.
To Saint Sylvia!
You too have an important date coming up in a few weeks, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, you can't be referring to... I never was in the practice of celebrating them much, you know, and now I really don't see the point.
I, on the other hand, always enjoyed celebrating birthdays and anniversaries, particularly my own. I consider them very lucky dates, and for that reason insisted that Ulysses come out on my birthday, February 2, 2222. Has a nice ring, don't you agree? So I think we must mark the occasion of yours. It would not be right otherwise.
You really are trying to find any excuse to drink, aren't you?
Bon anniversaire, Marcel.
What did you say this wine was?
You like it? It's fondant. A Swiss white I've grown quite fond of since discovering it when living in Zurich. Although some of my friends have been uncouth enough to compare it unfavorably to an archduchess's piss. But then that could be more an indictment of their uneducated, unrefined palates or the archduchesses they frequent. For red, I like Saint Patrice.
You must appreciate that Saint Patrice is named after your Saint Patrick.
He's the saint I admire the most. He was modest and he was sincere. He's the only one a decent man can get drunk in honor of. Like me, he tore off his Irish shackles and found refuge on the European continent. But he always knew he would go back.
Would you have wanted to be buried in Ireland too?
Oh, that's water under the Liffey Bridge.
Don't you mean the James Joyce Bridge?
That is something, isn't it? To have a bridge in your hometown named for you.
As well as a street.
Possibly the most dismal street in Dublin. Though what should I think about monuments to me that everyone in Dublin can walk all over?
You forget your statue off O'Connell Street.
Ah, that people sit on and pigeons shite on.
And bust on St. Stephen's Green, not to mention the James Joyce Centre Sweeney's, James Joyce Tower in Sandy Cove. Your Bloomsday is celebrated in a grand festival in Dublin and elsewhere. Museums are dedicated to you. Your Ulysses to be feted throughout 2022 around the world. You can hardly think you are unappreciated and unrecognized now.
Yes, but it certainly took long enough. And you as well, as you should be. I was at your funeral, you know.
Oui, I noticed. You wore a new suit. Cela m'a touché, vraiment.
The suit or my presence?
Les deux. Though they can rather upset a man's day, les funérailles, n'est-ce pas?
It's much worse when it's your own. Yours was quite the event. A moving church service followed by a grand procession that wended its way through the whole of Paris. You would have liked it.
A shame one cannot enjoy one's own funeral, mais c'est comme cela. I was there in spirit, though.
As was I. At mine later on.
You do not need these anymore.
Well, hold on. What are you doing?
There now. You see.
Yes. I do. I see very well, thank you very much. After all the operations, all I've gone through, I never would have thought it possible. I see perfectly now.
Better than 2020. And my asthma, my allergies, all my aches and pains, all that is no more as well. Here, there are no more impediments. None whatsoever.
No impediments. Our souls have approached that region where dwell the vast hosts of the dead. Now we can apprehend their wayward and flickering existence.
We, one by one, we each in our turn become shades. But if we pass boldly into that other world in the full glory of some passion, how much better than to fade and wither dismally with age. We have done that, at least with our writing, n'est-ce pas?
You know my novella The Dead as well.
Bien sûr. Funny, in it seems the dead are more alive than the living.
For that is too often the case. In the midst of death we are in life. Both ends meet.
Le cercle encore.
His soul swooned slowly as he heard the snow falling faintly through the universe, and faintly falling like the descent of their last end upon all the living and the dead. It was snowing the day of my funeral. Snow and ashes are very much alike.
Ashes to ashes. Like Homer, you and I have created our heroes, Jim. You're Mr. Bloom, Stephen Dedalus, my narrator, who go on their journeys, whether for just a day or for a lifetime. With the fluidity of time, a day can seem a lifetime, and a lifetime but a day. And we, too, take our journey that is life, finding our way eventually and inevitably, in our own fashion, home.
To the journey. And what a journey it has been.
To the journey.